Actually, when we look at young people every year across the Youth Voice Census, it isn't that they don't start off kind of agnostic about work. Young people, particularly between the ages of 11 and 13, are super excited, super ambitious. They want to work. They can name loads of careers. They get really excited. Something happens to them as they move through 14, 16, and then particularly across 19, where their confidence in their skills, their qualifications, and being able to access work pretty much falls off a cliff.
Welcome to ASDAN's Cross-Sector Lab podcast. We would like to welcome Lauren from Youth Employment UK and also one of my amazing colleagues, Amber, who is going to share some information about our learner voice, as well as a probe into the amazing work that Youth Employment UK are doing around the young people that we're all here to serve. So, Lauren, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much. What a joy. What a session this is going to be today.
We've got a few questions that we have allowed Lauren to see as a sneak preview, but we will just have a work through them, and I'm sure the conversation will flow beautifully. So to start off with, we're hearing lots of information, even more so in the last sort of 4 weeks, around young people's work placements, the need for them, the purpose, and let's bring them back seems to be the real message, which is a great message. So one of the things that I worry about, and some of the meetings that I've been involved in recently, is what does a truly successful work placement look like for every young person? And you have the young people's voice on your side as well. So what do you think that's going to look like that will be really successful? What do schools need to think about?
Yeah, thank you. And we do, you're right. We have the young people's voice on our side. So we have 9 years of Youth Voice Census data, which asks a series of questions for young people, really placing it and basing it in who they are, where they live, how they're feeling about lots of different aspects before moving into exploring whether young people be in education, employment, or somewhere on their journey between the two. It's one of the largest data sources of young people aged 11 to 13 in the country. Work experience and work placements and an experience of work is the biggest factor and the biggest issue young people tell us is holding them back. It's something young people really hold as a worry, that they don't have opportunities to be able to explore work and really understand what it is. So I think from that first point, it's such a big question, isn't it? And you probably had, in answer to this question, some very serious, very academic responses in terms of what a successful work placement could look like. But from my side, it's really simple. We did some work when Gatsby were reviewing their benchmarks a couple of years ago, and we continue to ask questions about this in the Youth Voice Census. A truly successful workplace is something that young people are engaged and involved in, being able to help secure and understand. That isn't leaving young people to secure it for themselves. It is about having really good conversations about what a good workplace might be, what skills they might have, what they want to explore. But it is something that young people are then prepared for by both the employer and the educator in that space. So they understand what this workplace is going to be, why they're doing it, and what it might or might not teach them. A successful workplace won't always be putting a young person in an environment that they go and get a job in the future. A successful workplace can also be an opportunity for young people to explore more of their skills. But for that success to really embed, it also has to be supported while young people are there and then connected back to what they've learned and how they've understood it. Young people are experiencing more work experience, more moments with employers than they ever have before, which is a really, really good thing. When they are disconnected, when they are one-off, when they aren't then connected to them, their skills and their opportunities, it risks having this short-term burst of momentum and confidence for young people, but it isn't then building real confidence, real understanding, real next step progression.
I was talking to Careers and Enterprise earlier this week, actually, is around making sure that these placements are developmental, they're not observational placements, which is very much what they have been for a long time. And they've got that kind of deeper opportunity for the employer as well to see their pipelines coming through the door. What does it really look like? So I think it's such an amazing opportunity. And then to be able to do it well in the kind of the school years, because the 45-day placement, which I'm going to come to a little bit later on, that's a big, scary beast, I think, for FE colleges starting to now mirror the sandwich placements that universities have. So I think that's going to be an interesting place, but let's get it right further sort of lower down the chain, so to speak, in the nicest way. So those young people stop being a visitor, they start being a temporary employee, and maybe some job carving has to happen for that experience, but it's worth it in the long run. You were talking about the Youth Voice Census and those 9 years of data, which is amazing and such a wealth of knowledge. We're quite early on in our direct youth and learner voice. So Amber, do you want to just share about how we're looking at that reach? Because you do yours, Lauren, through census, through a questionnaire, and as well as your own panel I've had the privilege to see in the past. But Amber, what's that journey looking like for us at the moment?
So we're looking into 3 strands of our learner voice strategy. Like Melissa said, still in the early implementation stages. But one that's really kicked off for us is ASDAN Champions. Lauren, I know you spoke about the census and we took a lot from that. The biggest thing for us was that confidence and belonging piece, which we've kind of looked to kind of make a bit of an impact in with ASDAN Champions. So it's kind of like a reward scheme, if you like, really, where one learner will be our champion of the month with a focus on that development of the essential skills. We work really closely with ASDAN and also contact with the community. There are 2 big drivers. We'll then invite nominations from centres, and those learners then will be selected. They'll receive a certificate and a little article about them on our website. I often say it's the best part of my job, and seeing these success stories when I'm not directly in schools is really powerful, and it's something that we just hope kind of boosts the recognition of more project-based learning, and those learners see that, although not necessarily a traditional pathway. I don't like that term, but we want to reinforce that there is so much good in that pathway. So that's one element.
That's the old school pathway now. We're moving into this new with us, Amber, but it's also that showcasing of those young people allows them to feel proud of their journey, use their voice, but also employers hopefully see the kind of, this is what young people are already committing to. I think volunteering is something that, again, in schools was present a long time. I'm talking a long time ago, when I first started teaching 30 years ago. But it has really, moved away, hasn't it? And there isn't opportunity time. It's all really, really difficult. So if we started to really think about what you've already shared, Lauren, about those young people have told us, and last year's census, it was really clear, and I suspect even more so now, that they don't feel work ready. And they're seeing in the press all of these conversations about them and their identity and who they are. Not sure who's speaking to them about it other than your good stuff. But those young people saying that they don't feel work ready, whilst we've also got employers really clearly saying what the skills are, there's a bit of a mirror match, isn't there? The young people are saying we haven't got, and the employers are saying they're not coming with. So how are these placements potentially, or schools as a wider role, how can they really start thinking around how they're going to bridge that gap?
Absolutely. The nuance of this question is one of my favourite things to talk about. So I'm going to try and be really succinct. But actually, when we look at young people every year across the Youth Voice Census, it isn't that they don't start off kind of agnostic about work. Young people, particularly between the ages of 11 and 13, are super excited, super ambitious. They want to work. They can name loads of careers to get really excited. Something happens to them as they move through 14, 16, and then particularly across 19, where their confidence in their skills, their qualifications, and being able to access work pretty much falls off a cliff. But when we're looking at this question in particular, young people, it's not necessarily that they don't feel work ready. In fact, when we think about the physical process of accessing work, the applying for jobs, the CV writing, the interviews, young people continue to grow their confidence in that. They have also continued to grow their confidence, perhaps unsurprisingly, in the skills that education broadly is really supportive of. So listening in particular, teamwork, and some of those problem-solving skills. I'm sure there's a lot to be said about that listening one. I say it with a grin. But when we then look at what I suppose the challenge and the problem is, young people can't see and don't believe or can't perceive and really reflect that those things are turning into assets that they have. So they can't see and translate their skills into an asset that's going to be useful for an employer. When they're then applying for jobs, experience is the thing they're often needed the most. And, we then tell them that, it's all about personality. But the reality is it isn't. It is about where young people can show that they have had experience of translating those skills and the things that they have into practical things that they can talk about for 2 or 3 minutes in an interview process. That's the thing they're missing. And it is really this asset thing. Young people are not confident that employers want to hire them. They're not confident in the experience they have. Whether their qualifications are good or not doesn't appear to matter, because employers aren't recognizing that then as something that is kind of moving forward. You can have a skill and be confident with it. If you haven't practiced it, recognize you've got it. And really importantly for young people, if you can't evidence it then when you sit with an employer, that's really challenging. It doesn't move you into work. It doesn't move you into your next step.
Knowledge opens the door a lot of the time, but actually those employability and those confidence skills that they have acquired, these skills during their journey, socially and outside of school as well as internally, kind of confidence to walk through the doors into that interview is quite agitated in the way that it kind of comes together. One of the pieces of work that we've done and Amber's being involved in is around redeveloping our courses at ASDAN. Been here for 35 years, all of that story sits there, but actually introducing the foundation and higher and extended project qualification, which we've had the latter for a long time. What we've really thought about exactly what you've just been saying, the fact that they are kind of pre-research based, thinking about those transitional skills you have and seeing how they can be purposed or repurposed, however you want to look at it, into a different sector, so outside the educational window, and then having that ability to reflect on that. So our courses for PQ Suite are based on vocational journeys of thinking and insights rather than, your favourite subject kind of thing. They're very focused on developing and honing those skills, which has been really interesting piece of work to watch the team that Amber's been working with around it. And, having skills around young people, like Amber, for example, who's been through an apprenticeship journey previously in your career, it's really helpful to have that insight. Amber, if I draw you in, you're just younger than me, so I always think you've just come out of school. Obviously, you've been out of school for a long time. You've done your apprenticeship. But listening to what Lauren and I are talking about, would this type of thought process and way of empowering have helped you in the past?
Yeah, definitely. I think we talk a lot about that practical core element and applying. And I think there's just got to be that connection between theory learning and applied learning, because the two can't work in isolation. To me personally, I think that's where the confidence comes in. I know we spoke about my apprenticeship pathway then. I think I left school, I left with the results I wanted. I was happy with that, but was I confident in applying myself to the working world? Probably not. And then when I got through that route with apprenticeship and learning through taking the theory that I learned in school, and also applying what I was learning on the apprenticeship route, but actually getting stuck in and doing, I think where the real growth happens, not only in my professional journey, but also that confidence and understanding that you belong in that workplace. And I think that I think about that a lot when we're talking about work placements and how we can drive that forward. I think the first step is helping young people understand they do possess these skills and they are applying them in a way that can be transferred then into that employment setting. We spoke about champions briefly then, but some of the stories I'm hearing, yes, okay, although somebody did a presentation in school, that directly correlates to a presentation that they do at work. But I don't think the young people necessarily see that bridge between school and employment until they have conversations with a trusted adult to guide them there, or they're put in a situation where they do see the correlation themselves. So I think for me, the gap is understanding that there is that bridge, and applying that learning that you've learned in the classroom is probably where we'll see the biggest growth.
I remember one of my first teaching jobs, the head teacher talking to me about, don't keep seeking permission, because you come out of school, you come out of university, you're always, can I, in your enthusiasm. And he just said, don't seek permission, but ask for forgiveness if it goes a bit wrong. And I say that to my staff now, not the same thing, but often, you've got your job description. I don't expect anyone to be able to do their job description. I expect them to know how to ask. And that pulls us back to that word belonging, Amber, that you used. And do you think the belonging and this feeling of needing permission to be in the workforce is a blocker, Lauren, with the young people that you're hearing back from?
I think for a large part of a large group of young people, perhaps so. One of the most kind of startling revelations across this year's Youth Voice Census is that young people's real perception that there will be no jobs, that literally there will be no jobs for them. And so for a moment, it's less about belonging, but particularly in previous years, we saw young people's sense of belonging. They really don't feel like that employers are supportive of hiring them, that they're a place to be. But it's really important for young people to be able to see that. The perception for young people in this year's Youth Voice Census is really centered around that media narrative, that world they're living in right now, actually, that there are a lot of jobs. And from that sense of it too, that it isn't young people that are going to get them when they're out there too, from that work experience perspective. So of course that starts to impact their belonging, their motivation, the confidence that they'll be able to apply. But we certainly see, particularly for young people with additional needs, free school meal recipients, and our young women, particularly how that sense of belonging within their local area, their sense of safety, hugely impacts the opportunity that they can and want and will be able to travel to, be able to access and support to. So certainly that sense of belonging can really narrow opportunities, particularly for our groups of young people who are most vulnerable in those circumstances and situations. But one of the biggest factors this year is to overlaying that is that young people just don't believe there are jobs out there for them, which is really concerning, because the young people that fill in the Youth Voice Census who are in work are having a much better time than the perception is of kind of young people sitting on the outside of it. And I think there's a lot to say about apprenticeships as part of that. And I really like, particularly the work ASDAN do, but thinking about how apprenticeships and courses like yours are bridging that gap between preparation and progress in terms of participating in something, showing that it works.
That's one of the pieces of work we're doing at the moment. And a lot of our work is all credit to you guys, because the Youth Voice Census last year and the year before, we've really taken on board those voices to try and shape the way we're engaging with partners, as well as developing the courses to a more sophisticated, relevant now, those young people in front of us and those young people in 2030 that will be in front of us, to make sure that was taking the voices from the census, I think, has been so helpful to us.
I love to hear that's what ASDAN's doing. But I think there's also an employer responsibility in part of this too. And we go back to the question, kind of, what can these work experience placement give? And I think often a lot of that work is put on educators, but we do also have to stop designing work experience for your average young person in terms of who we think is going to be able to access and who we're supporting it to. There's some real employer readiness, and actually, whilst work experience has been doing the rounds for longer than any of us will care to remember and recall, there are real moments we've seen in our Good Youth Employment Benchmark this year that our work experience support that employers are putting in place isn't as strong as the employment support that they will put in place, and the early careers exploration that will guide young people there too. There is more work to support employers to be more youth ready. There's certainly more work experience to do to support young people to feel they're better able to progress.
One of the meeting I was in earlier in the week with Careers and Enterprise, that's who we're doing some work with at the moment, was so useful in some mapping work that we've done is exactly right. What are the employers going to get from these young people from an evidence base? And one of the aspects in mapping our personal effectiveness qualification across to a work experience placement is that young person being able to navigate what is it they need, and helping employers understand that, not necessarily for them at that point in time, but that employer taking some learning from not just vulnerable young people, but any young people that are coming through the door at this time, rather than trying to gauge. So things like the 2-tick system for employers has gone, I think, if there is such a thing anymore. That kind of gave a very rigid standards that you were expected to meet. But we all know, same as education, you can't standardise it. You're employing the young person that's in front of you. If they can articulate what they need, bonus kind of thing, and is the work experience an opportunity for them to learn how to do that, and employers encourage and learn from that as well. I think, like you say, the early careers hubs that employers have are great, and that's what we're just looking at the moment, is how do we look at supporting at that end, whether it's an apprenticeship or a young person coming into the first stage of their career, continuing to learn and explore those kind of non-knowledge based skills, those hardwiring skills as we call them, to really sustain the placement. And especially looking at care leavers, I think is a over it's an oversight area to one extent because there's a judgment that's already made. But equally, I think people are scared around, are they going to stay? Is there a resilience level? Is this their history, their journey they've been on, rather than actually they're going to be the most resilient member of staff you've got if you look after the kind of side of things. So I think there's so much exploration, but employers can learn that stuff as part of work placement offering. So it's got that two-way journey about it.
I agree. And I think what's really interesting and really sad that we've seen across the last 3 years of Youth Voice Census data, but not only are the number of young people engaging in volunteering, but any extracurricular activities continuing to decrease. There are obviously groups of young people who will have felt excluded, have felt like they belong, would have been unable to access those opportunities historically. But when you think about those groups, young people are doing less of those opportunities, so that means they get, where we look at what COVID might have done to disrupt education and formal work experience, whether it was good or bad, and you talk about those 2 weeks fondly or not, actually it continues to have an impact. But the fractures in other ways and places, other moments that young people are together in and have to build some sense of cohesion and then around that continue to decline. And really sadly this year too, not only is it declining, but the value young people place on them continues to diminish too. Actually, to be related to work, be related to skills, be related to learning about yourself, continues to decline, particularly for young boys across the region too. Young women are more likely to see the value in them, but they're more likely to be anxious about travelling to certain places to feel safe, to feel like they belong, whereas young boys don't place that same attachment to the value of it too. It doesn't always have to be these 2-week work experience. I think in modern work experience is revolutionary in terms of what it will be able to do, but certainly the support for employers and everyone to think differently about what 2 hours in a school or bringing young people into different learning environments, really opening your doors. It's got some real momentum. It is coming at a time where everybody feels under pressure, is one of the big concerns we'll have.
Absolutely. So I think that kind of leads us into the kind of the Melbourne review, obviously, and all that comes with it. I think to kind of open this area of the conversation, language is so important. I again remember as a deputy head experiencing it and listening to senior leaders talking to young people around that if you don't go to maths, you won't get a job. Well, if I'm already failing in maths, I'm already challenged by maths, well, I may as well not be thinking about the jobs. So work placements, let alone the real world of work, is being used as a kind of, this is a threat to you. Do good here or you won't do good there. And actually, I think all know that sometimes there's young people that flourish towards the very end as they're maturing, as their social identity has kind of got a bit of calm about it. And actually, that's their best learning moment. Not in year 7 when they're trying to work out where do they belong in the pecking order. Again, so I think language is important from that point, but also the language that, it shapes expectations. So we're still using the word neat, so it's got not straight at the beginning of it. We, as a teacher, or as a head teacher, I would work quite carefully with my staff around not using punitive language. And here we are as a whole nation using the first word of this label is punitive. The next 3 words are about empowering yourself, about training, employment and education. But we've already knocked it on the head by saying you're not and using that language. So people have started changing it to LEAT and looking at education, employment and training, which immediately changes who I feel that I am at this stage in my journey. And it's absolutely fine to be looking. We're all still looking, probably at different ages. I know my partner's just looking at a new career at the moment and is far more mature than I am, kind of thing, knocking on the 60-year window. So we're always and it's a really positive thing. You employ someone and say, where do you want promotion? Let's keep looking. But these young people, we've already used that punitive word at the beginning. So just thinking about that and there's lots of conversation about the pathways of learning and work and those kind of side of things. What is the policy and language change that, young people want, but also you as that representative of Youth Employment UK, what do you want to, as well? It doesn't just have to be your own opinion, Lauren, but what do you as an organisation that is fighting and elevating that voice of those young people.
I think that's really interesting, and this has been super topical recently, and I really appreciate you. You changed my mind a little bit, Melissa, as you were talking about it, because for many years people have gone, we just shouldn't call them neat, we just should call them something else. But the reality is, we should live in some of that. We should live and own some of that. It isn't the name; it's the reality of where young people have got to. I suppose from my side of things, when I first started to hear LEAT as one of the new acronyms, for me, it misses something in terms of when we say looking for, it sort of implies that before those young people weren't looking. Like, there are people within that NEAT focus that were always looking, and there are people within there that aren't looking yet because they can't. And actually, there is a real reason why they can't access what's next for them, and some of those barriers are really real too. I think, focusing on names and language, I have to say, I think NEAT is a label that young people don't like attributed to them. Of course they don't. For the young people we have spoken to, it's often a label they only realise was attributed to them after they have moved into work and as they move forward. So for me, there's something about kind of labels and what we're gonna do with them, what it changes and for who as they start to access that. I would just wonder, and I know there's been many of them, but for me, there's something about recognising a journey and having kind of that journey to employment, education and training as part of that message that shows that you may be somewhere on that journey. You might not be looking yet. And I just think for some young people who know they're not looking at the moment, what that means is part of it. But for the young people we've spoken to, I have to say, young people that we have engaged with tend to only find out they were NEAT after. And I think that's a real shame because, that it's stopping young people accessing opportunity, it's stopping young people accessing moments, and it's stopping people accessing the support that is available from government and other services to be able to move them into looking in journey.
I think the connotation of that language for employers is quite, I think, disparate as well. Some people think, well, there's an opportunity. A lot, I suspect, think, well, they're the ones you don't really want to, because there's an immediate assumption, and suddenly universal credit comes into the conversation and this awful world. And I know lots of young people who've just finished university and they're, I'm going to have to apply for universal credit. That's what it's there for. And your taxpayer, when you get that first job, is going to pay it all back. So don't you worry about that. That's a system that's there to support you have this adventure of looking for work. I think my concern, and the reason for bringing the word NEAT up, is it's all over the news headlines at the moment. So those young people who weren't aware suddenly, because it's rightly being elevated, not sure why it has to be elevated so in your face, next to there's a war going off here, this incident's happened here, and in the middle of those two reports there's something around these young people who are busy on a journey and trying to work out where they are. I mean, Amber, what are your thoughts about that language?
For me, it's part of a wider conversation. Melissa, you probably brought up a few of my thoughts there, like in the news headlines. How much of it at the moment are we seeing that's positive? I know my views at 24 probably a lot different to 14, 15, 16-year-old Amber, who probably thought the world was definitely a bit more scarier, and something that what's been thrown out in the news about now. I wouldn't have had a lot of experience talking around those topics and understanding what they really mean. So my kind of question and my stance on it, if you like, is, are we throwing another negative into quite a scary news line at the moment? And is the language change one way we can control a conversation and turn it into something that's a little bit less scary? Again, that's just my opinion based on the wide landscape of the world. Lauren, I think you raise a really good point about understanding that you are NEAT. I think if whatever we choose to do with the language, I think it's the awareness piece for me and knowing that it unlocks opportunities. So I think the most important thing is young people understanding that they might fall into the category, but it's not necessarily always a negative one. And there are things that we can do to help through different organisations or avenues that they can go down. So I think awareness is the one for me rather than language.
I think it's really important what you're saying there, Amber. And one of the things, again, from last year's Youth Voice Census launch was really interesting. I can't remember the young person's name, But when they were speaking to all of us that had come to listen to that kind of the launch, one of them talked about the fact that the biggest concern or upset, I can't remember the exact language that they used, was that they are not equipped with the skills their parents used to be equipped with. So just bringing the parent aspect into that. I don't know, again, for the young people that you're working with and you've been gaining that kind of really important insights with, where are parents in this conversation? Do they want, is there I don't want my child to be labelled with like this, or where is that dialogue, do you think? And we don't speak to parents from an ASDAN point of view, but it would be really interesting to kind of understand a bit more about that.
It's so interesting, that parent conversation and connotation. And of course, parents are living more in some of those media narratives. We can only speak in extremes when we write media reports, and we can only, everything is terrible or it's brilliant, and there's no in between. And we really saw that last year, and people kind of stepping back. It's like, I don't know what I feel, because because this is too much, and we can't move it through. To support the quantitative data set that we provide the Youth Voice Census, we go in person and run in-person sessions, and actually parents come up a lot. When we were talking to young people. So whilst we didn't speak to parents directly, so many young people told us, my parents said there's no job. My parents said, if I get an apprenticeship, I'll be lucky. They're like gold dust to be able to get. We heard that to really strong degrees, particularly when we were in alternative provision environments too. So parents are hearing some of this narrative, and they will feed it through around kind of work and opportunities. And I think you're right. We all very fondly think that when we were 16, we were brilliant and we were so much more skilled. The reality is work and life were different. And we probably weren't as good as we recall ourselves being, but work is all different for young people and so much more challenging to access. Our expectations of how someone should enter the workplace are now so much higher than young people are being prepared to be able to support. And I think parents do worry about that. I think parents also can play a factor in their sense of safety for their young person undertaking new opportunities that might sit outside of formal education and outside of work experience too. So I do think a lot of that fear and concern will sit in and around parents. And when you think about COVID and going on furlough, the first time families probably would have had to have talked about redundancies and opportunity that's really real and really raw for people. But certainly from young people, the fear from their parents that there are no jobs is really strong for them.
Yeah, and you're not sure if that's actually kind of them deflecting from the fact that young people are staying at home for longer as well, and it's having to change the dynamics of family life compared to previously. So that there's a multitude of struggles, I think. So for those young people, it's a really hard, we know it's a really hard space for them to be. Is there something that you would really want to say if you were suddenly in a space that you were in front of 3 or 4 of the main core policy makers? What would they be? If you had 3 messages you wanted to give them, what would they be?
So for us, for Youth Employment UK, but for the young people we hear from and speak to too, for the 3 biggest factors would be to start support earlier and really think differently about the education system that can support it. Building an education system that enables, yes, what is core curriculum, but also enables so much more about who a young person is, enrichment, engagement, opportunity, technical skills, linking to work and work experience really clearly. We would think about expanding the youth guarantee into a full youth participation system, building something that works for all young people to be able to better identify them. Some of the really boring, important stuff, better data, better tracking, better support, but thinking about a range of interventions that we are able to on and off ramp young people into as many different options and opportunities as possible. We would also think about how we measure that. So using the Youth Voice Census is a real key and core measure that says young people in this area feel there are good places to learn, good places to earn, they feel safe and that they belong here and that there are going to be opportunities for them. And we do the same for employers too, through our benchmark, ensuring that we are monitoring and measuring, guiding and supporting employers to make sure when they are providing opportunities, they are good in the same way we do to our colleges and training providers too. We are ensuring that there is quality within the provision we're offering, and there is something in ensuring supporting employers to think the same.
And I think that joined up aspect, that there are various different parties in this game, isn't it? And it's trying to work out and that's why we've taken the model that we have and run it from year 6 into 7. So those transitional skills are starting to flow all the way through. And even the short courses that we have, so we've had an English one for a long period of time, but actually I don't think anyone highlighted the fact it's contextualized. So actually, if you're doing your year 7 English, one of the first things you get asked to do is write a letter. And so actually through our short courses, that can be completely contextualized for that young person, hone the evidence for their oracy skill. And it's not even about the evidence for a regulator. It's that young person going, well, in year 7, I can speak like this already. Let's reflect on that. So I'm now in year 9, choosing my options, obviously, hopefully doing a foundation project qualifications to help develop those choices. But just honing it. I've had girls for a couple of years. Now's the time to place them. I think it's so important. If we all went back to really think about it, we were being taught these things. We talk about being taught through stealth and delivery, but we were taught all these things, but no one said, and pick it up and use it over here. And we need young people to have the agency to do that decision making themselves. Teachers are incredibly busy. And I was with a school a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and they've got 2,000 learners in their school on a 2-week timetable. So that English teacher trying really hard to look at persuasive language and oracy, they might only see that young person 2 times twice a week. So suddenly we're only in school 36 or 38 weeks a year. They may only come across that individual child 30 or 40 times a year, and that's it. How do they have that opportunity to think about that bigger picture? So I think, there is a joint attitude that needs to come through, and policy we'll see as an idea in essence, isn't it? And you take that big P to a little p policy and localise it. That there's so much you can do with it, but we won't solve everything for today, I don't think. And so I think we have spent the last couple of decades pairing young people with qualifications, just to round circle where we came from in this conversation. It's ahead of SEND provision. Previously, I had real battles with parents around, I want them, they are capable of doing 10 GCSEs, absolutely. So they can either 10 bits of paper and a bit tired and maybe a bit more anxious, or we could do 7 of those and a couple of BTECs. And those BTECs, those project-based developments of learning, will help them recognise the skills, use the skills. I always encourage it to be media or sport or music, trying to get a bit of work-life balance in, do something for pleasure as well as purpose. And those young people flourished. And we did very job-carved work experience over a whole term, because we were Progress 5 was what we were held to account rather than Progress 8. So we had the luxury of that shifting around. So qualifications have been really key, and we're expecting young people to get qualifications and be work ready with those qualifications. So that's where we started this conversation. Are there other things that you'd really like to share that could really help us all understand what capability and confidence look like in partnership for young people?
I think so much. And where do you start when you're collecting the views of over 11,500 young people this year? It's a real responsibility to make sure that you're sharing that. I think from the Youth Voice Census this year and the 2026 data that we'll launch, what's really important, what's really striking is that young people are still ambitious. They are really keen to be able to achieve for themselves. They want a life that's broad and full. They want to be able to see themselves in opportunities, to earn houses, to be able to move forward and progress well in whatever opportunity there is. But the access to that doesn't feel equal. Whether that is for those groups of young people who cannot see that there are jobs locally where they live, but also for those groups of young people that can just never see themselves coming out of that certain situation that they're in, that sense of safety, that sense of fear that young people have in and around themselves. I think really quickly for young people is how fast some of this media narrative moves through to. young people do not believe there will be jobs where they live. It used to be, when we're asking people about barriers, there'd be a sense of always work experience being the biggest barrier that young people perceived would stop them accessing work now and in the future. Jobs is now the second thing. A lack of jobs is really what young people believe the barrier is. So the belief that young people hold that there won't be jobs for them, we can start to see translate in lots of different ways. So firstly, it's reinforced by things like AI coming into the system, and young people, particularly those with additional needs or without experience, they couldn't see themselves in work in the first place because they couldn't see there was a job, but also they're not strong enough in kind of confidence as to who they are, and actually where personality would have played and made a difference for them. They feel locked out of those moments and those opportunities. But we're also starting to see earlier within the system massive poor pupil behaviour, disrupting classrooms, disrupting activities, young people's kind of connection to the attainment, the opportunity, the future within our classrooms. It will really it is really showing how it's struggling for those groups of young people, but moving it forward. But I think from what we see most in this year's Youth Voice Census is, I think sadly, the reality is when young people are in work, they are mostly positive about the space that they're growing, the opportunities that we'll be able to afford them now and in the future. The gap between young people's perception before they get there and the reality of work is as massive as the perception that young people have about employers wanting to hire them and employers thinking that young people aren't skilled enough to join. Some of these problems kind of deepening across the landscape really widely as well.
I think the loss of the Saturday job and the part-time job, and I know I had a paper round when I'm really old now, when I was 12, because it was what everybody was doing, and there was the localised opportunities, and they have gone. I know a lot of young people that, again, as a head, that they couldn't get a Saturday job even if they wanted to. And it's like, in some ways, like, well, that's great, actually, because you'll get really tired, and actually, I don't want you to do these 100 GCSEs. So you kind of got stuck a little bit with some of that. One of the things that come out in the news today, poignantly, is around the all schools needing to identify those at risk of becoming NEET at primary school in Key Stage 1, which feels like to me, it feels horrifying. Because it's what's going to happen with that. And, like you say, news is an elevated view of something. And it talks about, those on free school meals, those coming from a care experienced environment. And suddenly all their parents' employment is the other thing that they're looking at. And we know those as teachers and educators, those. So suddenly to start collating a list feels, incredibly crude. I can understand why people might want to see that. And is there going to be a focus, do you think? Or, we're going to need more work focused in opportunities here because of the makeup of it. But we're also already deciding that young person's future.
So for me as a governor of a primary school, I've always been really passionate about ensuring that more careers, wider access and wider curriculum is available. I think what's really interesting and where I sit is that the Youth Voice Census captures if you were ever a free school meal recipient, just as one data point on its own, that the factor of having free school meals follows you. So people who are completing the census at 30 years old today have got the same, have still got a 10 percentage points barrier in the confidence that they will be confidence in their skills, confidence in the local area, their safety, their security. So things like that do matter, and I do think we have to be careful with labels. But I think if we are really clear on what we're utilising this data for, I think it can move us forward more positively. We know that groups of young people learn differently. We know that groups of young people will want and experience life in those different moments. I think if someone is monitoring and measuring what really works, what makes a difference for those groups, there is a real opportunity here to make that difference. The Youth Voice Census is one of the biggest indicators that historic disadvantage continues to follow you through. I think it's super sad that at 30 years old, you are still living that same percentage point increase in being able to ask for a pay rise, etc., than your peers. So for me, there's an element of safely doing this and, starting well and monitoring and measuring it. But I get the fear. I do.
Yeah. It's got to be, there's got to be a balance. So whilst this is recognised as a concern in specific places. Potentially there's potential heavy pockets of this. It's to what, so what is probably the leftover question, isn't it? And how are we going to support those young people to bring that equality, which obviously ASDAN as a charity voice is around bringing that equality of access to education and in turn employment opportunities or opportunities to make a difference to your community in the future. Because I also, again, coming from a special educational needs leadership background, I know absolutely there are young people that will be so purposeful in their community, but no matter what an employer does, it will be degrading for that young person potentially to be employed in some environments with the PA that's having to do it. There are different, we're all a mixture of people, and some people have the most perfect purpose to changing a community in a different way. And again, it's something that's put into a data set sometimes that we need to make sure it isn't, which is why I think the Youth Voice Census is so important, because there's a real time view of what's going on right now for young people. So hugely important. And so I just want to thank you hugely for your time today and the insights that you have brought. And I know there's some great conversations with yourself and Amber about, what can we do to help as that charity and support in any way. So please always reach out to us so that we can do that. And likewise, if there's anything we can do, that we will always want to do that and be, this is about this young people and those early careers staff that are coming into businesses and making sure they get the best opportunities possible. So a huge thank you, and onwards and upwards, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And absolutely agree, and can really see how this year's Youth Voice Census data really plays into what you're building as. And I really strongly believe we can't, that the middle ground between preparation and progress is this bit in the middle that we're absolutely doing that you are absolutely doing in translating. So yes, it's super important as we launch it through and move it over.
Thank you, Lauren and Amber, for your time. I think we've had a great conversation. We all, I think, see that knowledge absolutely opens doors, that employability skills are the things that young people want and will give them the confidence to walk through that door for their future. So a huge thank you for your time today. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.